Okay, so we have a couple ways of figuring out slope. We have a rise or a run. That's one way when we have a graph. And we also have our slope formula. But you've heard me say a few times about how it doesn't matter what order you pick the points in. And let's investigate to see if the order matters. So here we have a line on a graph. We have a graph of a line, I should say, on a coordinate plane. And we see that my line is going up from left to right, so I know it's going to be a positive slope. So it says select any 2 points in line to label as P and R. All right, I'm not going to worry so much about the P and R, but let's say I pick this point right here. Okay, if I want, I can label it P, but I'm not really worried about that part. In fact, since I can't write a P, I'll just erase it. That is the point -4, -3. And let's say I pick this point here. Again, I'm going through grid lines. Okay, this will be R, but I'm going to say this is the point -2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to use these 2 points. Okay, so identify the coordinates. I'm going to write them both here, and I'm going to do a second problem over here, so you might want to leave some room. So I'm going to say that this over here is -4, -3, and -2, 1. Okay, and I'm going to leave my graph right here, and I'm going to work on finding the slope, as many different points as you can. Well, we're going to do 2, and we're going to change the order. But anyway, to find our slope, remember, we use our slope formula for this. Yes, we can do rise or run, but we want to practice our computation. And remember, our rise now is the difference in our y's. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1. Difference means to subtract. Over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Okay? X coordinate, y coordinate. X coordinate, y coordinate. So I'm going to make my -4, -3 my first one to start. First, and this to be my second. Okay? And then I'm just going to plug things in. So I am going to say my y sub 2 is 1 minus my y sub 1, which is a -3. Now, we're going to be careful there. Minus a -3. Leave it. Don't change anything. Over my x sub 2, which is a -2, minus my x sub 1, which is a -4. And then I'm going to solve this. Okay, I hate looking at minus negatives, so I'm going to go keep, change, or change my subtraction to addition. Keep the 1, change the minus to a plus, change a -3 to a +3. Keep the -2, change a minus to a plus, change -4 to a +4. Again, subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. 1 plus 3 is 4. -2 plus 4 is a +2. Okay, -2, go 2 down 2 on the number line, come back 4, you have +2. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So we see here that the slope is 2, meaning 2 over 1, rise 2, run 1, rise 2, run 1. Okay. But let's see, we're not going to do as many points as we can, but let's change the order. Might be something you have to do in your homework, maybe. So let's break this up here, okay? Ooh. Let's try that again. Okay, let's just break that up. Okay, and I'm going to take these 2 points again, and I'm going to say -4, -3. I'm going to use the same points, -2, 1. But this time, x, y, I'm getting there. This time, I'm not going to say this is my first point. I'm going to say this is my first point. X sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. And I'm still going to use my slope formula. The difference in my y's, y sub 2 minus y sub 1, over the difference in my x's, x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Okay? And my y sub 2 right now, this time it's a -3. So I'm going to go -3 minus my y sub 1, which is 1, over x sub 2, which is a -4, minus x sub 1, which is a -2. Now let's compute that. If I go keep, change, or subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. Okay, that becomes a -1. Keep, change, or subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. Becomes a +2. -3 plus a -1 is a -4. -4 plus a +2 is a -2. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So notice we get the same either way. The difference is these are both positive, these are both negative. same sign, dividing, you're going to get a positive answer. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which points you pick. If you pick this to be the first point, this is second, or this the second, this the first, doesn't matter. The ratio is going to work out the same. It's not a point on the graph, it's a ratio. And it also works if we would have chosen different points, because remember, we're always going up 2, rising 2, and running 1. The reason we're running 1, or even if it's 4 over 2, right? What if you come here and you rise 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then run 2. Yeah, it's the ratio. The ratio is going to work out the same because it's the constant, because it's the unit rate. So just to kind of finish up here, we have our summary. And a couple things I just want to point out to you. The slope of the line can be calculated using any 2 points. We kind of just showed that, all right? And this whole lesson is on the slope of a non-vertical line. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But you can see we have our slope formula right here. Okay, I'm going to rewrite it because I want you guys to make sure you can find this. So slope formula. I want to rewrite it sloppily, I bet. Of course. So when you have 2 points, in this case, I'm going to call x sub 1 and y sub 1, and x sub 2 and y sub 2. Our slope formula says, again, this m here means slope. Our slope formula says you take the difference in your y's. That's your up and down movement, that's your y's. So I call it y2 minus y1 over the difference of our x's. That's our left to right movement, that's our run. And I say x2 minus x1. This is our rise of a run. And we can do this now without being on a graph when we're just given 2 points. The last thing I want to point out right here is it says the slope of a vertical line is not defined. Notice everything we've been doing with slope is we're saying that these are all slope of non-vertical lines. Remember, when we talk about vertical lines, we're talking about up and down, okay? So if a slope is telling us how steep a graph is, if a slope is telling us how much we're moving as we go from left to right, well, I can rise on a vertical line, but what happens when I try to go left or right? There is no left to right movement. So that's why we say the slope vertical line is not defined. There are not 2 numbers to compare, because if we say we went up 1, 2, 3, 4 here, I'm not going over it all. That's 0. And what happens when we divide by 0? How do we take 4 and break it up into 0 groups? That means it wouldn't exist. That's why it's not defined. A slope needs a ratio. It needs to compare 2 numbers. And it just comparing it to 0 doesn't work because we're not moving left to right at all. There is no run. Major idea though is the slope formula. That's just another way we can find the slope, and it's going to come in handy as you move on in algebra.